Hi, this is Tara. Welcome to Sky Gazing. Today we're studying the Genjo Koan. We're actually studying the first line of the Genjo Koan, which is the prose poem essay in Dogen Zenji's Shobogenzo. However, we are actually reading chapter 4 in Shohaku Okamura-san's book, which is Realizing Genjo Koan, the key to Dogen's Shobogenzo. So this is where we're actually beginning our study into the text. I'll just read the first line of the text to you, which is, when all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, there is delusion and realization, practice, life and death, Buddhas and living beings. This is a really complex line. It seems like one pithy line, which is just giving you, a generic idea of the projection of the world, Maya, illusion. But it's actually got layers of the Buddha's teachings in it, as we will see. The word Genjo Koan means actualizing reality. So this pithy poem is just suffused with meaning. And one of the best instruments to understand it is Shohaku Okamura-san's book. So this is chapter 4 in his book. So he says, when all dharmas are Buddha Dharma, pertains to the 4 dharma seals. These are the foundational teachings of the Buddha. I'll read you a bit of what he says. He says the Buddha's basic teachings, such as the 4 noble truths and the 12 links of causation, that is Pratitya Samutpada, which is as it is known in Sanskrit, center on cause and effect. And one of the best known summaries of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings, represented in the first sentence of Genjo Koan, is the teaching of the 4 dharma seals. Now, in Japan, a seal is a stamp that functions like a person's signature. Such a seal certifies that a document, painting, or work was written by a particular person. Similarly, if a teaching contains the 4 dharma seals, it can be said to be Buddha Dharma or a teaching of the Buddha. So he goes on to explain the 4 seals. Before I get into his explanation, I wanted to give you the version that I had studied, taught to me by Tibetan monks, which I feel is, my teacher, particularly Venerable Geshe-la Dorje Damdul. Those of you who might know him, he was His Holiness the Dalai Lama's personal translator for many years, an absolute wisdom mind. And his teachings are so especially the foundational truths of Buddhism are just so clear. It is just clarity that when you listen to the way he teaches it, you understand it. So I'm just sharing. Of course, I can't explain everything that he does know in the way that he does. So you please forgive any errors that I might be making and any shortcomings in this. Any wisdom you're getting from it is his and that of all my teachers. But I will do my best to convey a part of the way they teach. So, I'm just giving you some background before we get into Shohaku Okamura-san's teaching. So he says that, so basically when the Buddha gains enlightenment, first he does not want to teach, and then he's convinced to teach. And the first thing he decides to do is share his wisdom. He first wants to share it with Acharya Alara Kalam and Acharya Udraka, who are his first 2 teachers. But then he realizes that they have already passed away. And so he turns his direction towards Sarnath, Varanasi, and the first of the 5 disciples were the first 5 friends who had joined him in meditation. So he teaches them. And this is what we call as the turning of the wheel of Dharma. The wheel of Dharma was turned. So when he begins teaching, there are 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. Okay, so basically what does this mean? It means that all teachings that the Buddha has ever given can be come from these 3 families of teachings. These are the source teachings, and everything else can be classified as under them. So before we understand the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, we have to understand that there are 4 Buddhist philosophical schools. There is the Vaibhashika, the Sautantrika, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamika. I personally subscribe to the Madhyamika school. But so there are distinctions. For instance, Chitta Matra is mind only, and they say mind only truly exists. Whereas, so each one differs, and the nuances are very, very technical. So I won't go into that. But what you have to understand is that when the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma in these first three turnings, um, he did it each in a specific place, each addressed a specific subject, and each addressed a specific audience. Okay, which I will now explain to you in the way that I was taught. So, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma took place at Varanasi. What did he teach? He taught the Chaturarya Satya, that is the Four Noble Truths. That this is the suffering exists, the reality is suffering, and there is a way to exit the suffering. And he taught that the Four Noble Truths exist truly. The target audience for this teaching was the Vaibhashika and the Sautantrika schools. This was a foundational teaching, but it was a simpler teaching. Okay. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma took place at Rajgir, at Vulture's Peak. Over here, the Buddha taught emptiness of true existence and emptiness of objective existence. The teaching was of Shunyata. Nothing truly exists. The audience for this were the Madhyamika philosophers, because this was a more complex sort of teaching. Now, if you notice, there's a contradiction. In the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, or an apparent contradiction, the Four Noble Truths exist truly is the subject of the teaching. At Rajgir, the subject of the teaching is that nothing truly exists. So this becomes the foundation for the third turning of the wheel of Dharma at Vaishali. So here at the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha is basically addressing 10 questions from this scholarly audience of nuns, bodhisattvas, monks, scholars, and disciples. And he takes 10 questions. Of them, one of them, Paramartha Samudgatha, is the name of the disciple. He stands up and he says, you are the enlightened one. So obviously you've done this with a reason. He offers prostrations. And he says, but why is your second teaching, second turning of the wheel of Dharma, contradicting the first one? And he asks that why do you say that there is nothing truly exists, but you've also said that the Four Noble Truths truly exist? So in the third one, he's basically interpreting his previous three teachings. Now, the four seals of Buddhism are the four pillars of the philosophy, and they come out of these three turnings of the wheels of Dharma, the wheel of Dharma. What are the four seals? Some schools believe there are three seals, but being Madhyamika, I follow four seals as well, as according to my teachers. So, what are the first three seals? Sabbhe sankhara anicca. All sankharas or conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Sabbhe sankhara dukkha. All sankharas, conditioned phenomena, or compounded phenomena, are unsatisfactory. Sabbhe dhamma annata. All dharmas, that is, all conditioned or unconditioned things, do not have a permanence of self. And nirvana, shanti. Nirvana is peace. Okay. So anitya, dukkha, anatma, and shanti. So these are the four seals, and this is how they come about. So now I will read you what Shohaku Okamura-san says. He says, the first of the four seals says that everything in this life contains suffering, isai kaiku in Japanese. The second says that everything is impermanent, shogyu mujo. The third says that everything lacks independent existence or fixed self, shoho muga. And the fourth says that nirvana is tranquility, nihan jakuju. So these four essential points, he says, make up a message from Shakyamuni Buddha to us. The message is that we can live our lives in one of two ways. We can live within samsara, which is the first seal, or within nirvana, which is the fourth seal. Whether we live within samsara or nirvana depends upon whether or not we awaken to the reality of impermanence, that is the second seal, and lack of independent existence, which is the third seal. Okay, so just to remind you, that according to Shohaku Okamura, the first seal is dukkha, the second is impermanence, the third is lacking in independent existence. Some schools say it as the first seal is impermanence, the second is dukkha, and the third is anatman. So you'll find these differences between the schools. So when Shohaku Okamura is explaining the first line of the Genjo Koan, he begins by explaining the second and the third seals, which are impermanence and the lack of independent existence. And he says these seals express the reality of human life and the reality of all beings. In Mahayana Buddhism, the reality that all things are impermanent and without independent fixed existence is referred to as emptiness. When we see the reality of emptiness, we see that sooner or later we must die. And we see that nothing, including ourselves, possesses an unchanging nature. The body and mind are simply a collection of the five skandhas or aggregates, that is, form, materiality, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And the basic constituents of all things. The five skandhas are very, very important. We'll come to it when he's explaining Pratitya Samutpada, which is the 12 links of dependent origination. But for now, what you can, remember is that these five skandhas are what are called the five aggregates. Skandhas is different in Buddhism than in Hinduism. So if you already have a philosophical background in Hindu traditions, there are a lot of terms you'll find that get confused between Buddhism and Hinduism in our minds. They're not confused in the philosophy, but don't assume that it has the same meaning. So the skandhas in Buddhist philosophy are the five aggregates, and coming together, they create this idea that we have a self. They are like the constituent parts. What are they? The aggregate of form, the aggregate of feeling, the aggregate of discrimination, the aggregate of compositional factors, and the aggregate of consciousness. So understanding the skandhas is also to understand this concept of I. And the concept of how we create the I is essential to understanding why the Buddha says anatman. So anatman is this dismantling of the idea of the I, right? So, if, for instance, if you read the Patanjali's Yogasutras, Patanjali also points to this false identification with the self in Sankhya philosophy. Okay, so he's explaining this a little. He says somehow we assume that there is something within us that does not change, and this assumption is the foundation of self-identity. So my physical and mental conditions have changed constantly from infancy to adolescence. They continue to change. I believe that I'm the same person that I was as baby and teenager. And we think that there is something that does not change in us. This I am so and so, I have this name, I have this label. Okay. This something that doesn't change, he says, is called Ga in Japanese or Atman in Sanskrit. And the Buddhist definition of Atman, somewhat equivalent to the idea of self as it is sometimes called in English, is Jo Itsu Shusai, which means the permanent and only owner of the body and the mind, which controls and operates the body and mind. So the Buddha taught that the Atman or self does not ultimately exist. He said that everything living or existing is a collection of different elements that are constantly changing. One of the most famous examples he gives is of the chariot, that when you take a chariot and he asks, what is a chariot? Is the chariot the wheel? Is it the axis? Is it the seat? Is it the rider? Is it the horses? Is it the reins? So when you start dismantling the chariot, you find that there is no thing called a chariot. It doesn't exist. It is created out of component parts. So also I does not exist. It is created out of component parts. And if you start dismantling it, you'll realize there is no truly existing I. You'll find the term truly existing used a lot in Madhyamika philosophy. Okay. So he says, Shohaku Okamura says, our lives are dependent on other beings and elements that allow us to be alive as the person we are in this moment. So if one of those things that we depend on changes, whether it is within or outside us, we also must change. We are interdependent. We are a confluence of other people, situations, things, causes, and conditions. This is, in fact, what the Buddha meant when he said that everything is impermanent and without essential existence. This is the basic reality of our lives, but it is difficult for us to accept. So the teachings of impermanence and lack of independent existence are not difficult to understand intellectually. When you hear these things, you might think, okay, that's true. Yes, I see that things around me change. On a deeper level, however, you probably still identify yourself as me and identify others as them or you. On some level, you're likely to say to yourself, I will always be me. I have an identity that is important. Okay, and you might decide, I'm a specific religion, I'm a specific race, I'm a specific ethnicity, I speak a specific language. If we did not assume that we have this something within us that does not change, it would be very difficult for us to live responsibly in society. This is why he says who are unfamiliar with Buddhism ask, if there were no unchanging essential existence, doesn't that mean I would not be responsible for my past actions, since I would be a different person than in the past? But of course, that is not what the Buddha meant when he said we have no unchanging Atman or essential existence. Why? Because it's a deeper level of study, but basically the karmic actions, the seeds that we sow, to have an impression in the mind. One of the ways that Shohaku Okamura-san explains this is he says, consider how our life resembles a river. Each moment, the water of a river is flowing in different, which is the sort of famous example from Heraclitus, that you can't step in the same river twice. So it is constantly changing. This example also occurs in Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, where he says, Siddhartha reaches this river, and that's when he starts gaining his insight, because he's looking at this river, and this is what sort of dawns on him, probably sort of, narrative interpretation, but still useful. So, and yet the water, and he says, and yet the water is always different. So we all know this example. And you cannot say which of these droplets of water is the true river. Okay. So in reality, a river is just a collection of masses of flowing water contained within certain shapes in the land. Since our lives are also just a collection of conditions, we cannot say that we each have one true identity that does not change. If we do, and at this point you might think of the objection, but no, I am a teacher, I am a therapist, I am a chartered accountant, I am CEO of a company, I am actor, I am director, whatever your profession may be. And I have been this, and I have been this name, and I have been this identity. What happens is, so long as the delusion persists, your identity is intact. Something changes. A company shuts down. I remember I had this neighbor who one day he worked in a factory, I think a chemical factory in Mumbai. And one day he came to me and he said, at that time I was quite young and he was much older, family and daughter, son, everybody lived next door. And he said, my factory is suddenly shutting down. Can you help me write a resume? I've worked there since I was 19 and I've never written a CV in my life. So I said, yeah, sure. I said, give me your information. I'll sit and make it for you. And so he gave me his information. And it was 2 lines. He had graduated from one college. He had studied in that he had worked in, directly moved into that factory, began working on the shop floor, and he had one promotion in 20 years and had gone into a managerial role. But basically that's it. That was his whole life, and that factory was shutting down. So I had to struggle to write that CV, which is why I remember it so starkly. But when something that we believe is our identity is taken away from us, that's when you kind of realize and start questioning and say, who am I then? If this is not me, if I'm not my designation, if for a lot of people, it's their children or it's their family name, or it is where they have come from, or their village. And if you take one of these aspects away, as life is wont to do increasingly more in these times, we're not living in the days of our, like, say, grandfathers, where they, had one job and they lived in one home. And today, a lot of us are much more mutable for various reasons. And in that mutability, it's showing us that we are so dependent on these, which is why we cling, which is why mothers and fathers cling to children, children cling to parents, a teenager might cling to the peer group. You might cling to an identity that you believe has been fundamental in shaping you, and that's when it starts, really affecting the mind, and the emotions heavily. So he says that since our lives are also just a collection of conditions, we cannot say that we each have one true identity that does not change. What we call the self is just a set of conditions existing within a collection of different elements. So I cannot say there is an unchanging self that exists throughout my life as a baby, as a teenager, as it is today. In fact, one useful thing to I remember, and I've written about this in my book Anitya also, is that even the skin on your body, the cells are changing over a 28-day period. So even physically, you're probably not the same as you were, say, 6 months ago. So this is basically what he is explaining in this, when he's explaining the second and third seals. And he says we still must recognize that there is a certain continuity in our lives, that there is causality, and all that we need to be responsible for what we did yesterday is to so yes, there is self-identity, because otherwise, without it, we wouldn't have any need for the Shilas, we wouldn't have morality, we wouldn't have accumulation, we wouldn't have merit. Okay, so even this is why these are very complex teachings, you see. Even though in actuality there's no unchanging identity, um, we still have to understand the continuity of our actions and the consequences and the chain of cause and effect on along which we continue to travel. So he says we must speak as if we assume that there is an unchanging I that has been experiencing the changes. Otherwise, the word change has no meaning. If you are inherently unchanging, then there is nothing to change. This is why these teachings are very, very complex. According to Buddhist philosophy, self identity is a creation of the mind. We create self identity because it is convenient and useful in certain ways. Although it is not the only reality of our lives, self identity is a reality for us, a tool we must use to live with others in society. Then he explains the first seal. The first seal is everything contains suffering, sabbe sankhara dukkha. In I think Japanese philosophy, it is the first seal. In other traditions, it can be the second seal. So what does this mean? It means that we suffer when we don't recognize the reality of impermanence and lack of independent existence. So, because of disregarding the second and third seals, that is impermanence and inherent existence, because we think those two are real, we think things are permanent, we think we have inherent existence, we have suffering in our lives. So, these two causally create suffering, according to him. And he says if we cling to our sense of independent self as if it were permanent and make self centered desire the priority of our lives, then life as a whole becomes suffering. Everything contains suffering. And while here he's using the translation of suffering, I'd like to remind you that a better translation is probably dissatisfaction. It's kind of like everything that you attempt and everything you try is insufficient. It turns to dust in your mouth, and you are constantly then wanting and craving, which will be explained in the 12 links of dependent origination. So he says that when we live based on a self-centered desire and the idea of permanence, we grasp at things that we like and try to push away things that we don't like. So we have craving and revulsion, what in Sanskrit is called as raga and dvesha. So we cling to what is good and expect it not to change. We try to protect ourselves, our egos, our minds, our possessions from what we don't like, which is typically change in some form or the other. So sometimes we succeed and are happy, and sometimes we fail and we feel terrible, and this becomes the cycle of samsara. So he says samsara is a Buddhist term that usually refers to the cycle of existence, the transmigration of rebirth, or a person through the six realms of existence: hell, hungry ghost, animal realm, the realm of the asuras, and the human realm, and the god realm, or the realm of the heavenly beings. However, he says here he interprets samsara as the emotional up and down quality of our lives. Sometimes we are happy, and sometimes we are in agony as though we were living in hell. So, according to him, he's saying these realms can coexist. And within our lifetime itself, and the things that take us from one to the other, this process itself becomes samsaric. So we create samsara in an unending cycle in an attempt to protect our egos, to protect this I-ness, what in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is known as asmita. And in this cycle, we feel we are sometimes in heaven, sometimes in hell. And if it's not that only something bad or negative happening to us is the hell realm or is suffering, because sometimes the good, which is why, in these six realms, the only path to liberation is through the human realm, because that is where you're able to confront reality. Even in the god realm, think of it like the King Midas story, where everything you touch turns to gold and there's nothing to eat, and you can turn yourself also into gold. But it's also the unawareness. Basically, all the other five realms have a level of unawareness, and the only place where you can have awareness is the human realm. So and fundamentally, when you understand impermanence, you understand that everything that is born has a process of existence, but is already in a state of decay from the moment it is born. So, from birth itself, from conception itself, something that has a life to live of any form, that is why it's called compounded phenomena. Anything that is put together, that is born into existence, is already begun the process of its decay. So, everything we have is going to perish. It has an expiry date, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a job, whether it's your money, whether it's your status. Everything that you are basing your identity upon has its own trajectory, its own journey into its own decay. So, if it's children, they're going to leave home. If it's a location, maybe something is going to cause you to relocate. Studies will end, a job may end, whether by retirement or by some other forced relocation. So, if you're basing your identity on these prongs, you are inherently unsteady. So he says, no matter how successful we are, someday, even if it is not until we die, we must give up everything. I recently attended the 13th day ceremony of my guru, and I remember they were explaining the meaning of some of the shlokas to some of the foreign students who were seated there. And the explanation they were giving is, no matter who you are, however great, and somebody like, say, Sharad Guruji was a great yogi, had access to knowledge and teachings and practice since birth, um, and built a very, established lineage of teaching, has excellent students, was an upstanding man. Uh, Even for somebody like him, even your family will only come to the pyre. You are not able to take anything with you beyond that point, not even your body. So Shohaku Okamura-san says, no matter how successful we are, someday, even if it is not until we die, we must give up everything. We'll have to open the hand of thought whether we want to or not. The sense of independent self that today we grasp with our thoughts as the center of the world will someday perish. The sense of I has to go. If we are not successful in fulfilling our desires or in avoiding unpleasant things, our lives become painful. But even if we are successful and happy, that happiness or success is still centered or a mistaken sense of permanence and independence. We believe I did this, I'm in charge of this success, this my accomplishment will never go. Since those agreeable things are based on the hope that they will be permanent and will fulfill our self-centered desires, often we fear the loss of everything that our happiness depends upon. And since other people want to have happiness or success, life becomes a competition, because we're like, oh, they are successful, and why am I not? And why can I not have what they have? So, competition makes society a realm of the fighting spirits. That is the Ashura realm, in which some people are happy and some people are unhappy. So, Okumura-san's interpretation of the realms is that they all exist within our life, and depending on our actions and our thoughts and our inability to maintain that equipoise, we are being pulled between one realm and the other. And he says, I think this is the meaning of everything contains suffering. When we hear these words, we may feel that Buddhism is pessimistic, but this is not the case. What this means is that even when what we consider the positive side of our lives lies within the realm of samsara, and everything is part of the cycle of suffering. Everything means everything, not only pain, sickness, and death, but pleasure, happiness, and success as well. And this is something that we don't like to admit to ourselves. So when we say, oh, I'm not samsaric, we try to show that we are not worldly, we are not materialistic, we are above all that, but we are still clinging to these identities in one way or the other. And what we may say that, oh, I don't run after money and I don't run after fame, but we are all protecting these possessions that we have, including our name, our form, things that we earn, the family that we hold close, friends. And this is, it feels natural, but it is against the fundamental truth of life. The fourth dharma seal is nirvana. Nirvana is the way of life that is based on awakening to the reality of impermanence and lack of independent existence. It is not a special stage of practice, nor is it a certain condition of mind. It is simply the way to live one's life in accordance with reality. So the Buddhists call it nirvana, the Hindus call it moksha, but it is essentially this aspect of liberating the self. What are we liberating the self from? It is not that we are embracing death consciously, or uh, it is it is not something that is gained after death either. It is a way of living in this world that is free, that is unbound by entanglement, by raga and dvesha, by wanting, craving, rejection, revulsion. It is equipoise. It is living with detachment. It is living with a view of the truth. So he says, when we truly see impermanence and lack of independent existence, we understand deeply that we cannot hold on to anything. Nothing lasts forever. Seeing reality encourages us to stop clinging to our lives and their contents, and gives us a chance to open the hand of thought. I love that he calls us the hand of thought before life forces us to open it. The seeing, accepting, and letting go is Buddhist practice. When we deeply understand this reality and practice in accordance with it, we no longer believe we need to compete with others or with ourselves. We no longer struggle to be important or powerful, and we no longer strive to be who we want to be. Again, I'm just going to point out that in Buddhist philosophy, or in Indic philosophies, whether Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, this surrendering, this releasing, this letting go of ambition is the path, right? Whereas in Western systems, this is I can almost hear so many of you say, but then why should we give up our ambition? Why should we give up our striving? Do we become passive? Are we not productive? Do we not earn? We are so proud of our material possessions, and we should, because that indicates hard work. And this is a fundamental cultural difference within the Indic traditions. Accumulating possessions might be necessary to function, but it is not the aim nor the end of life. So artha is a purpose and a meaning by which we may live, but it is not the ultimate goal. It is just a way to sort of spoonful of medicine that helps, a spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. But artha in itself is not the aim. So, Shohaku Okamura-san says, this practice of awakening, which is itself nirvana, allows us to settle into the reality of impermanence and the lack of independent existence. We then begin to live more peacefully. Nirvana is not a fantastic state of mind like a drug induced sort of trip. It is not LSD. It's not a special trance or an escape from life, nor is it a state in which a person no longer experiences pain and sorrow. Something I like to explain to a lot of my clients is that it's not that these masters don't feel anger, it is not that they don't feel strong emotion, it is that they don't react to it and they don't allow the emotion to control them. So uh, the example he gives is of the Buddha himself. He was enlightened when he was 36. And at that time, he entered nirvana, and yet his life was not easy. He traveled all over India on foot at a time when travel was difficult. He experienced pain. He had poisoning. We know from stories that he was frustrated with his disciples, walked away until they sort of began to behave himself. He had to contend with jealousy from others, including his cousin. And he had to see, he was a wandering monk, he was an ascetic, he didn't particularly have power when he began in the political and social sense. So he had to, and he was coming here with a new teaching, with a new way of thinking, a new way of being. So you can assume that in these villages that may have been, and towns that may have been steeped in their own sort of philosophies and ways of living and being, to go and teach, he must have surely confronted some sort of resistance, which we know he did from various sections of society. So nothing in his life suggests that it was easy. So liberation doesn't solve your problems. It doesn't say, oh, here you have all the money you want, you'll never struggle for anything, all your bills will be paid, and your body will never feel pain. That is not what nirvana or moksha is. You will still struggle with the actual decay of phenomena, compounded phenomena in the world. So Okamura-san says, because the Buddha had been released from egocentricity, his hard times were no longer transmigrations in samsara. Pain was simply pain, pleasure was simply pleasure. For him, they were no longer part of the cycle of suffering. Within nirvana, we can appreciate both the positive and negative experiences as simply the scenery of our lives. Somebody who I've heard say this is Robert Thurman, who is himself a Lama. I've heard him say that when you get to enlightenment, it's actually very boring. You go, oh, is this it? Because what happens is it's not that something spectacular happens. It's not that you have fireworks going off. It's not that, you're hearing the angels sing in your ears every day. It is ordinary life. It is everyday life, but it's the way you travel through it that is enlightened. So Okumura says the scenery of life is another expression Uchiyama Roshi used to explain in Zazen practice. He said that even when we adopt the Bodhisattva path and practice Zazen, letting go of thought, we still experience many different conditions in all aspects of our lives. Some are painful, some are pleasing, and some are neither. That all these different conditions are simply the scenery of our lives. And we should keep working and studying regardless of the circumstances we encounter, so we can investigate the myriad dharmas, all beings and things. In nirvana, we can accept all conditions and even enjoy them in a sense, but of course, acceptance requires our effort and practice, and we must still work to develop ourselves and to relieve the suffering of others. If we open the hand of thought that grasps this person, that is ourself, as the center of the world, this clinging, if we release it, then our lives broaden and our hearts open to all beings. This is the basic teaching of the Shakyamuni Buddha. So to summarize, the four Dharma seals contain Buddha's basic message of cause and effect. Dogen Zenji refers to this basic message in the first sentence of the Genjo Koan, when he wrote, there is delusion and realization, practice life and death, Buddhas and living beings. He was presenting a view of reality from the perspective of individuality and cause and effect. I also just wanted to quickly run through with you the Pratitya Samutpada, that is the 12 links of dependent origination. Typically, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, this is symbolized as the wheel of life, and a wheel which is held in the demon's mouth. So the wheel is symbolic of samsara and the demon symbolizes impermanence. Inside it, there are four circles. The innermost has three different creatures which symbolize the ultimate cause of our suffering. They symbolize, the bird symbolizes attachment, the snake symbolizes aversion, and the pig symbolizes ignorance. The second circle symbolizes the afflictions, which serve as a cause and give rise to contaminated karmas. The third has five parts, which symbolize the five aggregates that create, as I mentioned, form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. This gives rise to the feeling of I. And in the fourth part, so basically, to understand miseries come into being by uh, um, through contaminated karmas. Contaminated karmas arise from afflictions. Afflictions arise from inappropriate attention and self grasping ignorance. So these four causes subsume and group into two, which is contaminated karmas and afflictions. So, what are the causes of suffering? Contaminated karmas and afflictions. How are all of these linked? How are contaminated karmas and gross afflictions, inappropriate attention, self-grasping ignorance, how are they linked? They are linked through the 12 links of dependent origination. And this is also known as Pratitya Samutpada. The 12 links are, the first is ignorance, that is avidya. Blind, it's typically in the wheel, it's especially in the Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism, symbolized as a blind person. The second is volitional formations, that is sankhara. It is symbolized by a potter, that is the karma, the actions that shape your life. The seed of consciousness is planted, karma is the cause. The third is consciousness, vijnana, which is symbolized by a monkey, the monkey mind. It jumps from body to body, and the seed of karma in number two, that is sankhara, is planted in vijnana, which is the consciousness. So consciousness becomes the cause. The fourth is Namarupa, that is three people rowing in a boat, and both is a body from two sources. That is the body from the parents and the mind from the past life. So this is also a result of your karma, which is planted in consciousness. Fifth is the Salayatana, that is the six sense fields, which is symbolized as a house with six windows. That is five sense organs and one mental sense. Sixth is Phassa or contact, which is symbolized as a couple. Just as a couple meets, sense organs and mind senses connect with the sense objects. Feeling tone is Vedana. It symbolizes a person with an arrow shot in his eye. And this is the internalization of the sense perceptions. We internalize them and make them part of our minds. They enter into our mind space. Eight is craving or tanha, that is symbolized as a drunken man who has a craving for samsara. Clinging, number nine, is upadana, which is the clinging and grasping, which is intensifying this feeling of craving, tanha, the attachment. And according to my teacher, these two, craving and clinging, increase more as we approach the time of death, because we have a fear of release. We have a fear of letting go. Number 10 is bhava, which is becoming or being, existence. And it is symbolized by a pregnant woman. When the dying process has begun, the seed of karma is germinated and it begins throwing you into the next birth. Jati is number 11, which is birth, symbolized by a woman giving birth. This is beautifully explained as the mind and body at this stage, it's the time of death. Birth begins at the time of death. And your mind and body are separated. The mind becomes subtler and subtler. All your sensory consciousness shuts down. And the subtlest version of the consciousness, the clear light of the mind, is the only thing that remains. All sense action has shut down. At this moment, you are dead. Body is a corpse. So, birth does not begin when you come out of the mother's womb. Birth begins when that light of consciousness, the seat of the mind in the heart chakra, is moving to the next form, the next body. So this is number 11. And number 12 is old age and death, Jara Marana, which is a man with a corpse on his back We continue to have these feelings, sense perceptions until we die. So there is a 1 to 12 sequence, and then there is a causal sequence of what causes the other. These are the 12 links of dependent origination, pratitya samutpada. Obviously, it's not possible for me to explain it, and neither do I have the knowledge or the expertise to explain it in great detail the way that the masters do. So if you're interested, I would recommend that you take this forward and study it wherever you can. There are many great Buddhist teachers, but for now, for our purposes of the Genjo Koan, all of this is what is explained in the first line, which, let me just read it again to you. The first line basically says, when all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, there is delusion and realization, practice, life and death, Buddhas and living beings. Thank you so much for listening. I will try to upload the second line by next week.